Today I'm going to try to draw this little corner in Krakow, Poland, and I think it's going to make for a good representation of and a good backdrop for what I'd like to talk about today. I'll get back to this specific drawing in a few minutes, but first I want to step back and examine my experience of the learning process a little bit more broadly. So I've been peripherally aware of the non-linear nature of learning for a long time. I've spoken about my experience with music and photography on this channel, both of which I think make for good analogs here. But I think photography, in part because it's more recent, so I can recall my feelings better, will serve as a better example. So when I first picked up a camera with any serious intention, I was struck by its surprising ease of use. The image being captured and displayed through the LED screen aligned with my expectations, meaning I guess that it resembled accurately whatever I would point it at. So I figured I'd hopped over the learning curve if there even was one. Words and concepts like composition, exposure, aperture, focal length, shutter speed, all that stuff meant nothing to me. And it wasn't because I'd somehow ascended beyond their significance, but that I was ignorant of them. I was at the absolute bottom, the floor of knowledge, and it would take exposure to my own ineptitude to realize it. My level of experience was so low that I hadn't yet run into problems that needed solving, so I could largely get by with my ignorance and confuse that for skill. As I walked along my path of learning, the first hill came into view. Maybe it was a technique I didn't understand or an editing practice I couldn't get right. And to scale that hill, I needed to learn. I could do so through experiential investigation, or I could seek it out externally, and I'd often do both. Those first hills are small, but they offer a taste of what's to be expected. From my ignorant perspective, I assumed the hills would only get smaller and easier to climb. But if you've ever pursued something to a meaningful degree with real vigor, you'll know that oftentimes those hills become mountains. This realization can be demoralizing. The start of the journey seems so straightforward, at times tiring, but along the way you realize just how arduous it will become and how in comparison, your struggles thus far have been painless and undemanding. It's at this stage where people, but I'll just use myself, where I must make some decisions. There are a few options, and none of them are necessarily correct. I could decide to stay where I am. I could take what I've learned up to now, apply it again and again, and build upon those skills and techniques incrementally, but not necessarily intentionally. Then there's B, and in the face of the exhausting, tumultuous road ahead, I can turn back. I could end the journey then and there, wave my white flag, and walk home. Or C, I could face the path, peaks and valleys be damned, in persistent pursuit of my destination, which in the case of the analogy would be to become a creative, competent photographer, or to just drop the analogy here, an artist capable of creating beautiful works. The reason I don't think just one of these answers is correct is because in some way, I think this unpredictable journey that I'm talking about can be regarded positively no matter how far along you get. I think for those who choose option A, their ignorance will put them into a box that they would seemingly welcome. If they're unhappy with the state of their abilities or what they can do with them, I'd imagine they would choose to improve or quit, to switch options. But if they're comfortable with where they are, then good for them. For the people who choose option B, the ones who turn back, I think we like to give those people a hard time because we see what they've done as giving up. Maybe we think they couldn't handle it or they didn't want it badly enough. And I'd actually say that this realization that the road ahead isn't worth it for them, given the time and energy it will take, is perfectly acceptable because now they can allocate it to the thing or things that they do find worthwhile. As long as it's not part of a pattern of quitting, when things get a little tough, or maybe embarrassment of being a beginner, which is, just an educational inevitability. For those who choose option C, well, I don't need to say that much about this one. We've heard enough about people like this. They've seen the road, they know it'll be difficult, but the dream is worth the suffering, so they carry on. All of these options come with their pros and cons, and it's up to the individual to choose their way. And I bet that most people have chosen all three countless times with countless endeavors, even though we'd all like to say that we solely choose option C. On that note, I'd like to say that I'm choosing option C to stick it out in regard to drawing. I'm at the beginning, granted. I can practically still see my house from this part of the path, but I think I'm far enough along to have caught a glimpse of what lies ahead, which, outside of the metaphor, means realizing my own ignorance and inexperience. I may not have reached the infamous valley of despair, to reference the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we've talked about, but along my way, I've certainly experienced a few confidence-taxing dips, which is what inspired this extended talk of process. Bringing it back to today's drawing, I'm experiencing one such dip. The things I consider understood, I'm finding difficult to understand, like the techniques I've grasped are slipping through my fingers. And what yesterday came easy to me, today I'm fighting to recall. I've had a handful of days that resemble this one, not in any kind of like sad or depressing way, but in a very clear step backward. I've experienced this feeling before. I know how it feels to ebb and flow in artistic endeavors, big and small. And although this one is different in its specificity, it's exactly the same in practice. Something I have learned and have had to reinforce in myself over time is this idea of discipline over all. And it's in these moments that that concept comes online. When things feel harder than I think they should, or like the other day when I was in a sour mood, the initial motivation that got me going is simply insufficient. That explosive burst of energy at the start can only take me so far. I don't know what it takes. Maybe it's clarity through previous exposure or something else, but deciding before you start something to just keep doing whatever it is you're doing, sometimes stupidly, is always, in my opinion, going to be better than deciding while you're doing it. On those rough days, I can rely on discipline, the no matter what, I'm just going to draw something mentality. But if all I had was the hope that tomorrow's me is going to have his own tools to work out the problem, at that point, I think I'm just gambling. On the flip side, if I can set tomorrow's me up, lay the groundwork ahead of time, expect these peaks and valleys to be a part of the process and not obstacles to avoid, maybe I can embrace the entire thing, and maybe that will make it all the more precious. Thanks for attending my TED Talk on the process. Should we talk about the drawing? Let's do it. So, I chose to draw this scene because of the potted plant and the window. The plant is something I've been practicing a lot at home, working on simple, straightforward shading and testing out a variety of plant shapes. The window seemed like a difficult but fun challenge, and I was really drawn to the grate, the flowers, and especially that detail on the top with the arch and clamshell. Needless to say, I was in over my head, as usual, and that, in my opinion, came from a foolish unawareness of the scene as a whole. The potted plant alone would have been just fine, and the same goes for the window, but together they become part of a greater scene. If I wanted to keep things reasonably realistic, I'd need to draw at least the wall, which meant including the ground to some extent, and that drew my eyes off to the stone wall in the back, which led me to the railing, and so on. This, like yesterday, is a classic example of not knowing where to stop, which, to connect back to the rest of what I've said in this video, is something I sometimes know how to do. um, as I walked up to this reference and when I filmed it, I considered what it would take to draw the plant in the window, and I decided on drawing just the corner of the building, enough to include the two primary subjects. But the moment my pen touched the paper, my awareness shut down and I was on autopilot. Because of my placement of that corner, literally the first line that I drew, the plant went awkwardly in the middle, which is nice in the reference. But for what I had planned in my head, that meant cramming the window off to the right. That one small decision set in motion a domino effect of subsequent unconscious, unstoppable decisions, apparently, leading me to what you're seeing here. Even though my composition was off for what I wanted, I decided to take my time with the potted plant anyway. I've managed to take control for a small amount of time working on shading, even though it's not all that nice to look at, and making that part of the drawing realistic right away. I thought I'd be able to do the same for the window, but as you've seen, before I knew it hit me, I was all over the page, drawing lines in places that I really couldn't care less about. I really wish I could have just taken a deep breath and focused, something I've said 100 times now, I know. Because I think if I could have spent 95% of my time on just these two subjects, really prioritizing them, I could have made this something nice. I'm hoping with this dip, this a rough spot in the process in particular is one that I will get out of sooner than later, because while I'm expecting plenty more of them, plenty more mountains, many of which will be much more difficult to exit, this one makes me feel more stupid than unskilled, and I'd love to get past that. Also, real quick, I have realized that ground texture like this is just something I'll have to take my time with. Again, in 2 dimensions, it's much more, I don't know, direct in how it looks, but in person, it's just this web of lines and textures, and it's just something I'm going to have to pay either very little or enormous concentrated attention to. And I've noticed that with a lot of things. With these drawings out, I am going a little quick, but at home, I'm really taking my time and it definitely shows. So I'm going to certainly have to get better at that. Okay, so here we have it. Judging by the topic of conversation today, I'd say you know where my head's at with this one. Lots of little problems I feel like I know how to fix, but for whatever reason, the process can be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and I'm just gonna have to embrace it. So what do you think? Let me know. How do you feel about the process stuff as well? Please leave a comment. Let me know your opinion on all that, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch and especially to listen to this one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.